say the Lord is our shepherd. But in this world of mud and rot, the sheep have grown teeth. My name is Samuel, I carry the cross, but I breathe the smoke of the east to keep the devil from breathing down my neck. This is not a journey of faith, it is a march of penance. Look at this village. Look at the stones. God didn't do this. We did.
Oh, light the herb and let the blue smoke rise to hide the devil from my tired eyes. Silver for the demon, lead for the soul, in a world that's spinning out of control.
Memory is a fickle surgeon. It cuts away the mundane and leaves only the trauma. When I look back at the records of Oak Haven, I don't see a village. I see a wound in the earth that refused to heal. I wasn't there when the blood first touched the stones. In 1348, my world was still defined by the sharp edge of a scalpel and the cold logic of Galen's anatomy. To the people of that miserable hamlet, the eruption from the well was a divine verdict, a sign that God had finally grown weary of their hidden cruelties. To the Vatican, it was a political inconvenience, a spiritual infection that needed to be cauterized before it spread to the neighboring dioceses. But to Father Samuel, it was simply a scent. He told me years later that he smelled Oak Haven 10 miles before he saw it. It wasn't just the iron-rich tang of fresh blood. It was the ancient sulfurous stench of an opening pit. Samuel rode into the village as the sky was bruising into a deep, sickly purple. He sat high on a black horse that seemed as tired of the world as its rider. He was a mountain of a man, draped in a heavy leather cloak that had seen more rain and ash than any man should endure. His beard, long and gray like the winter sea, moved in the wind, and his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, were fixed on the horizon as if he were tracking a predator only he could see. But he wasn't alone. Even then, the shadow followed Ammon, the Marquis of Wrath, didn't walk beside him. He inhabited the spaces where the light failed every time Samuel's horse took a step. The shadow in the mud seemed to stretch and twist into a skeletal, bird-headed nightmare that whispered secrets of Samuel's crusader past. The demon was a parasite, waiting for a single moment of doubt to claim the soul it had been promised. Samuel stopped his horse at the edge of the market square. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wet, rhythmic glub-glub of the well as it vomited crimson onto the cobblestones. He didn't dismount immediately. Instead, his scarred, calloused hands moved with a ritualistic slowness. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a hand-rolled cigar, bitter herbs from the east, leaves that smelled of incense and funeral pyres. He struck a flint. The orange spark was the only warmth in that cold twilight. He took a long, deep drag, the ember glowing like a dying star. As he exhaled, a thick, unnatural cloud of blue smoke swirled around his head. It was more than a habit. It was a sanctuary. To the villagers, he looked like a sorcerer. To Ammon, he became a blur. The smoke acted as a veil, a spiritual barrier that muffled the demon's screams. In that blue haze, Samuel found the clarity to be a hunter. He finally dismounted, his boots splashing into the bloody mud. The village elder, Bernard, crawled toward him on hands and knees. Bernard was a man who had spent his life praying for mercy he didn't deserve. He pointed a shaken finger at the well, where stones, smooth, black, and engraved with names, sat in the pooling gore. Samuel picked up a stone. He didn't flinch at the heat of it. He looked at the name Bernard etched into the surface, the letters glowing with a faint, hellish ember. He didn't offer the man a blessing. He didn't offer a prayer. He looked at the mayor with a gaze that had seen cities burn and asked a single question that stripped away the man's last shred of dignity. Where is the girl, Bernard? Where is the womb that birthed the earth's judgment? The mayor could only point toward the tithe barn, a decaying structure on the hill that looked like a gallows. Samuel looked up at it, took another drag of his cigar and started walking. He wasn't walking toward a victim, he was walking toward an execution. And in the mist behind him, the bird-headed shadow of Amun followed, its beak clicking in anticipation of the feast to come. The walk from the village square to the tithe barn was not a long one in distance. But Samuel later told me it felt like crossing a border into another realm. As he climbed the slight incline, the air shifted. The smell of the village, that mix of damp straw and wood smoke, was swallowed by something ancient and metallic. It was the scent of the deep earth, of minerals that had never seen the sun, churned up by something that didn't belong in our light. Samuel moved with the heavy, deliberate gait of a man walking to his own funeral. Every step was a battle against the instinct to turn and run his hand. The one not holding the glowing cigar was white-knuckled around his silver rosary. He wasn't praying for the girl. He was tethering his own soul to the world of the living. He could feel Alma and his personal shadow growing agitated. The demon within him was reacting to the demon in the barn like two predatory beasts circling the same kill. The barn itself was an architectural carcass, a massive wooden structure that seemed to lean away from the heavens. Its timber was blackened by age and rot, and the villagers, in their pathetic, desperate piety, had painted crude crosses in white lime across the doors. To Samuel, those crosses looked like scars on a dead man's face. They offered no protection, they only marked the place where hope had died. Heavy iron chains, rusted to a deep orange, were wrapped around the handles, humming with a low vibration that Samuel could feel in his teeth. Then came the sound, thud, clack, thud. It was a rhythmic, wet impact, the sound of something heavy hitting the wooden floor, followed by the crystalline clatter of stone on stone. It was the sound of a labor that should have been impossible. Samuel stopped just inches from the door. He took a long, aggressive pull of his cigar, the blue smoke swirling into the cracks of the wood. For a moment he leaned his forehead against the cold, damp timber. He heard a whisper, not from Amun, but from inside, a girl's voice, or what used to be a girl's voice, reciting a nursery rhyme in a language that predated the Tower of Babel. Science. The discipline I would later dedicate my life to, tries to categorize such things. We speak of hysteria, of mass delusions, of toxins in the grain. But as Samuel stood there, he knew that no ergot or fever could make the ground beneath his feet pulse like a heartbeat. He looked through a splintered gap in the planks. The darkness inside was absolute, a void that seemed to suck the light out of the evening, and then he saw it. A single eye. It wasn't positioned where a human eye should be. It was too low, hovering near the floor. It was wide, unblinking, and filled with a sickly, phosphorescent yellow glow. It didn't look at him. It looked through him, recognizing the shadow he carried. In that moment, the eye and Aman shared a silent acknowledgement, a greeting between two stains on the fabric of creation. Samuel felt the cigar slip slightly in his grip as a cold sweat broke across his brow. He realized then that the villagers hadn't locked the girl in to protect her. They had locked her in because she had become a doorway. Every stone she birthed was a brick being laid for a bridge from the abyss. The bleeding well was just the beginning. The barn was the heart of the infection. Samuel gripped the heavy iron lock. His hands were shaking now. A violent tremor that had nothing to do with the cold almond was screaming in his mind, a cacophony of ancient grudges and bloodlust. He knew that once those chains fell, there would be no going back. He would either excise this rot or be consumed by it. He adjusted his grip on his silver cross, felt the heat of the cigar smoke in his lungs one last time, and prepared to break the seal on Oak Haven's damnation. Samuel didn't use a key. He used the raw, desperate strength of a man who knew that hesitation was a death sentence. And a chain snapped. His sound echoed across the silent village like a bone breaking in a cavern. He kicked the doors open.
for a heartbeat. The darkness inside fought the twilight outside. The air that rushed out was freezing, smelling of wet silt and the copper tang of a slaughterhouse. Samuel stepped into the abyss. He told me that the barn didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like the inside of a throat. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of those smooth black stones were suspended in the air, defying gravity, orbiting the center of the room in a slow, grinding dance. At the heart of the storm was Alara. She was crouched in a bloody straw, her body twisted into shapes the human frame was never meant to hold. Her spine was a jagged ridge beneath her skin, and her head was bowed, hidden by a curtain of matted, dark hair. Alara, Samuel called out. His voice wasn't kind. It was a command heavy with the weight of the Vatican's iron will. The girl didn't stand. She uncoiled. Her head snapped back with a whip-crunching sound, rotating a full circle to face him. Her eyes were gone, replaced by glowing pits of yellow sulfur, and her mouth was a jagged tear filled with black mud. She didn't speak. She emitted a sound that Samuel described as the grinding of tectonic plates. It was the voice of the earth demanding its due. Suddenly, the stasis broke. The stones in the air became projectiles. They whistled through the dark like sling bullets. Samuel raised his heavy leather cloak, the stones thudding into the thick hide with bone-jarring force. He lunged forward, his boots slipping in the gore-soaked straw. He wasn't reaching for a prayer book. He reached for a silver cross, not as a symbol of peace, but as a brand. As he closed the distance, Amon finally unleashed himself. Samuel felt the demon's cold, oily hands manifest from his own shadow, gripping his brooch, trying to pull him back, mocking his attempt at holiness. The barn erupted in a chaotic symphony of crashing timber and demonic shrieks. Samuel pressed the cross directly against Alara's forehead. The contact produced a hiss of steam and a flare of white-hot light that blinded him. The girl's skin began to smoke, the black veins beneath her flesh pulsing with a sickly light as the infection fought to stay inside its host. In that moment of absolute agony, Samuel did the only thing that could tilt the scales. He took one final lung-bursting drag of his cigar, that bitter Eastern herb that blurred the lines of reality. He didn't exhale it into the air. He grabbed the girl by her jaw and blew the thick, glowing glow smoke directly into her open, silt-filled mouth.
It was a clash of two darknesses. The blue smoke infused with Samuel's own penance swirled inside the girl's chest, suffocating the ancient entity within. For a few agonizing seconds, the barn was filled with a blinding azure radiance. Then, the stones fell. All at once, thousands of them clattered to the floor, a deafening rain of obsidian that buried the straw. Alara went limp, her body finally returning to its natural, fragile state as she collapsed into Samuel's arms. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. The well in the village square stopped its crimson eruption. The names on the stones faded into gray dust. Samuel stood there in the wreckage, his cigar extinguished, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at the girl. She was alive, but her eyes were hollow, the light of her soul dimmed forever by what had used her. He didn't stay for the gratitude of the villagers. He knew they would only find new things to fear, new scapegoats for their sins. Before the sun could even think of rising, Samuel was back on his horse, riding through the cooling mist of Oak Haven. He was bleeding from a dozen stone cuts, and his soul felt a pound heavier. He told me later that as he reached the edge of the woods, he looked back once. He didn't see the village. He saw Amon standing in the middle of the road, the bird-skulled demon tilting its head in a silent, mocking salute. The battle was won, but the war was etched into Samuel's very marrow. He reached for his pouch, rolled another cigar with trembling fingers, and rode toward the next shadow. Because for Father Samuel, the only way out of the darkness was to go deeper into it. A girl broken, and the priest who lost another piece of his humanity to the smoke. That was the first time I heard his name whispered in the halls of the university. A man who hunted what we refused to believe in. But the shadows were growing longer, and soon they would reach for me too. The penance has only just begun.
Silver for the demon, lead for the soul.